Chapter 13. The Bucket Brigade. The storm was relentless. Rain hammered against the house like a barrage of small stones, and the sound inside was deafening. Water didn't just leak, it poured. Pots, pans, anything that holds liquid. Reba screamed over the roar of the wind. They scrambled like a crew on a sinking ship. Van was in the attic with a flashlight, trying to divert the flow with a tarp that was too small for the task. Cheyenne was downstairs, sliding cooking pots under a dozen different drips. Barbara Jean, however, was focused on only one thing: the false wall. The taupe drywall was starting to bubble. The moisture from the leak was soaking into the plaster, making it heavy and sagging. "Reba, it's melting!" Barbara Jean cried, holding her hands against the wall as if she could keep it together with sheer will. "The grage is giving up. The turquoise dream is peeking through." "Forget the wall, Barbara Jean. The floor is going to warp," Reba shouted, dumping a bucket of brown water into the sink. Just then, the power flickered and died. In the darkness, the sound of the house groaning under the weight of the water was terrifying. "Mrs. H." The flashing gave way. Van's voice echoed from the attic. "There's a waterfall coming down the chimney." Brock arrived 10 minutes later, soaked to the bone and carrying a crate of industrial-grade plastic sheeting. "I saw the clouds from the office. I figured you guys weren't ready for this." For the next 4 hours, they fought the house. They were a mess of mud, wet drywall, and frayed nerves. But as the storm finally began to lose its teeth, something strange happened. They stopped arguing. There was no room for ego when you were literal centimeters away from a total loss. By midnight, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. They were all slumped in the living room, sitting on the few dry spots of the subfloor. "We lost the false wall," Barbara Jean whispered, pointing to the bedroom. The taupe drywall had collapsed, revealing the bright, vibrant turquoise beneath. In the moonlight, it looked almost ethereal, a defiant splash of color in a gray, broken room. Reba looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at her family, wet, exhausted, and covered in grit. "You know what? Let it stay. If a buyer doesn't like the turquoise dream, they don't deserve this house." Chapter 14. The Real Cost of Stones. The morning after the storm brought a devastating realization. The roof needed to be replaced. Entirely. $30,000, the contractor said, scratching his head. "And that's the friends and family price, because I feel sorry for you." Reba sat on the porch, her head in her hands. They didn't have $30,000. They were already at their limit. If they didn't finish the flip in 2 weeks, the interest on the loan would skyrocket, and the bank would foreclose. David's won," Reba said, her voice hollow. He knew this roof was a disaster. He waited for the storm to do his dirty work. Van walked out, unusually quiet. He sat next to her, looking at the street where the black Porsche was parked once again. David was waiting like a vulture. "Mrs. H," Van said, "I have something. It's not much, but it might get us over the finish line." He held out a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was a gold championship ring from his college football days. "Van." "No," Reba gasped. "That's your most prized possession. You told me you wanted to be buried in that ring." "I did," Van said, his voice steady. "But I realized something last night during the storm. I don't need a ring to prove I have stones. Standing in that attic with you, fighting to save this dump, that was the real game. And I'm playing for the Heart team now." Reba felt a lump in her throat she couldn't swallow. She took his hand, the one that had held the crowbar so clumsily, and squeezed it. "We're going to win this, Van. Not for the money, for the team." Chapter 15. The Open House. 2 weeks later, the house was a miracle. The new roof gleamed in the sun. The interior was a perfect blend of Reba's neutral sophistication and Barbara Jean's friendly Texas warmth. And yes, the turquoise dream remained a vibrant secret in the back bedroom. The open house sign was in the yard. Reba stood at the door, her red hair perfectly coiffed, her heart racing. David's was the first one through the door. He looked around, trying to find a flaw. He checked the corners for mold. He tapped the walls for hollow spots. "Impressive, Reba," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "But you over-leveraged. Even if you sell it today, You'll barely break even after that roof repair. Was it worth the gray hair? It's not about the money anymore, David, Reba said, smiling as a young couple walked in. It's about the fact that I did it, and I didn't have to be a shark to get here. The couple wandered into the back bedroom. Reba held her breath. Oh, look, the woman cried. Turquoise. It's so bold. It's exactly what I wanted for my studio. David's jaw tightened. He turned to leave, but his path was blocked by Brock and Van, who were standing in the hallway looking like two very large, very protective bodyguards. Leaving so soon, Davy, two names? Van asked, spinning a set of car keys. You haven't tried the meatballs. Barbara Jean made them. They're organic. Chapter 16. The Flip. The house sold that afternoon. Full price. Cash offer. As they gathered in the kitchen of the Hart House that evening, the air was thick with triumph and the smell of cheap champagne. Reba held the check in her hands. The profit was small, only about $8,000 after all the repairs and debts were paid, but it felt like a fortune. To the first flip, Reba toasted, raising her glass. To the stones, Van cheered. And to the satellite, Barbara Jean added, winking at Brock. Brock smiled and pulled her close. No more satellites, BJ. From now on, if you want to talk, I'm right here, and I've already downloaded a GPS app that never gets lost. The phone rang. Reba picked it up. Hello, Mrs. Hart? This is Hal from Econostar. I'm calling to follow up on a service request from Mr. Brock Hart? Reba looked at Brock, then at the phone. A slow, mischievous smile spread across her face. Oh, Hal, you have no idea. Why don't you tell me all about it? I've got all night. Chapter 17. The Empire Strikes Back. Success in real estate is a lot like a high-speed chase. As soon as you stop to catch your breath, you realize you're being followed by a hungry predator. 3 months after the sale of the bungalow, Reba and Van had officially formed Hart and Montgomery Enterprises. They had a small office space, a shared computer, and a bank account that no longer looked like a tragic poem. We need a bigger challenge, Mrs. H., Van said, leaning over a map of Houston. The bungalow was just the preseason. I'm ready for the playoffs. The playoffs currently look like a 3-story Victorian on the edge of the historic district, Reba replied, pointing to a grainy photo of a house that looked like it belonged in a gothic horror novel. It's been on the market for 3 years. It's a local legend for being haunted. But I checked the records. It's just haunted by bad plumbing and a massive tax lien. Blackwood Manor, Van whispered, the name sounding like a challenge. It's got a turret. I've always wanted a turret. I could see the whole neighborhood. I could see David's coming from miles away. Reba laughed, but her eyes were serious. It's a huge risk, Van. The renovation cost will be triple what the bungalow was. If we fail, it's not just your credit on the line, it's the whole business. Mrs. H., we have the dream. We have the stones. And most importantly, he gestured to the door where Barbara Jean was currently painting a sign. In glitter, we have the designer. Chapter 18. The Victorian Shadow. Blackwood Manor was even more imposing in person. It loomed over the street like a disgruntled elder, its gingerbread trim sagging and its windows covered in a century of dust. Oh, my lord, Barbara Jean breathed, stepping onto the porch. It's beautiful. It's like a wedding cake that someone left out in the rain for 50 years. I can see it already. Shabby chic, Victorian glamour. Try structural nightmare expensive mistake, Cheyenne said, following them with her toddler. Mom, there's literally a tree growing through the kitchen window. That's not a tree, Cheyenne. That's natural indoor landscaping, Van shouted, already heading for the turret. As they explored the house, the silence was heavy. The air felt thick with the history of the families who had lived and failed here. Reba found herself in the grand library, where the floorboards creaked in a way that sounded almost like a warning. Suddenly, the front door swung open. It wasn't the wind. David's stood there, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. He wasn't smiling this time. He looked furious. I see you bought the Blackwood place, he said, his voice flat. I warned you about the neighborhood shifting, Reba. But this is professional suicide. You seem very invested in our suicide, David, Reba said, crossing her arms. Why is that? Are you afraid we might actually make this place look good? I'm afraid you're going to devalue the entire district with your turquoise dreams and amateur hour renovations, David snapped. I've just purchased the empty lot next door. I'm building a high-rise modern complex. Glass, steel, minimalist. It will tower over this old wreck and turn it into a shadow. A high-rise? Reba gasped. This is a historic district, David. You can't just build a skyscraper here. Watch me, David said, his eyes cold. I have the city council in my pocket. By the time you finish your first coat of paint, the demolition crews will be breaking ground next door. Have fun in the dark, Reba. Chapter 19. Secrets in the Floorboards. The war for Blackwood Manor began that evening. He's trying to block our light, Barbara Jean cried, clutching her mood board. If he builds a high-rise, no one will ever see the turret. The turret is the soul of the house.